So you want to be a silverback gorilla, huh? You want to be the king of the jungle, concrete, natural, or otherwise. Well, stop doing this and start doing this. Squat every day. And it helps if you eat 40 pounds of broccoli a day. But every time a gorilla rests, it squats. Perfect squat. Ass to grass. Every time. Perfect spine. Every time.
Hey guys, in this video we're going to be looking at the resting squat. I'm not resting right now.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Shapeshifter's Den, a place where we explore all things related to self-transformation and conscious movement. This video will be a movement journal entry, which takes a look at one of the most fundamental body positions of the human experience, the resting squat. Now if I had to recommend just one exercise to improve health, it would almost assuredly be the resting squat, or more specifically, a full squat which stops in the resting squat position. I've experienced numerous benefits from this position, and you will still catch me mobilizing my hips and ankles in this position before every single workout. It's a natural human resting position and a natural stance of defecation, meaning the body is designed to be in this position numerous times every single day. And when utilizing this pattern daily, the person will tend to enjoy fully mobile hips, ankles, and low back. For someone who can't currently get into this position, the issue is likely to be a range of motion limitation in either the ankles, the hips, or both. And if you happen to be an active person at all, this becomes a great recipe for knee and low back issues. However, in my experience, this pattern is highly medicinal to the body. By training to get in this position and spending time in it each day, a number of chronic pains and postural issues often just disappear. To get into this position, you simply stand with feet roughly shoulder width apart and toes slightly pointed out. Then bend at the knees and hips while dropping down and keeping the feet flat against the ground. The spine and pelvis should ideally be in a neutral position. Common faults will often include being overly flexed or overly extended in the spine, knees drifting inward, or feet pointing too far to the outside. However, there can be a great variety in form depending on the individual's unique body structure. For instance, those with longer torsos and shorter legs will tend to keep their spine very vertical while squatting, while those with longer legs and shorter torsos will often need more forward lean in their spine in order to maintain balance, and this is completely natural to them. Also, the angle and depth of the acetabulum can change the stance width as well as the angle of the feet. Basically, the hip is a ball and socket joint, and the shape and position of that socket will determine the most functional position for you to be squatting in. Deeper sockets allow for less range of motion, while more shallow sockets provide more. When the acetabulum is angled more laterally, a wider stance is usually needed with the toes pointed further out. But when the acetabulum is more angled forward, you will often require a more narrow stance. And this is just a brief look at some of the ways in which each individual body structure is unique. However, there are still many more variables which can change the ideal squat form for each person. Trying to identify all of them within yourself would be quite complicated. So the best way to determine your ideal squat is to simply tune your awareness into your body and test different stances and see what feels most comfortable and most natural to you. If you're paying close enough attention, when you get in a position the body doesn't like, it will tell you. You just have to be listening. You can also lay on the ground and pull your knees up towards your chest in a squat-like position. From there, you can adjust the width and position of your legs and see where you find the most hip flexion before your pelvis starts to tuck under. This is often called the butt wink. This will give you a good idea of your individual ideal positioning when squatting. However, for many people, it will seem nearly impossible to get into this position at first. But with a little consistent practice, the position will usually quickly become easier. If you have any trouble, consider using a counterbalance to help you. This can be something like a door frame that you're holding onto, or a weight that you're holding onto in front of you, such as a kettlebell or really anything with enough weight to help counterbalance you. You can also raise your heels up onto a book or some other platform in order to experience this position before your ankles are technically mobile enough to do so. To hasten progress, consider stretching and foam rolling the calves and hips in order to maximize your mobility before you attempt this. If, however, you find this movement incredibly easy either now or at some point in the future after a certain degree of training, you can progress the movement and make it more difficult and more beneficial by raising your arms overhead, performing an overhead deep squat. Along with the mobility demands placed on the hips, ankles, and low back, this position will also challenge the upper thoracic spine and shoulder mobility, making this movement practically a full-scale assault on all the issues created from sitting too often in chairs.
The Asian squat or the primal squat. What does it mean if you can't do it? What does it mean if you can do it? What are the benefits of the Asian squat? And if you can't primal squat right now, should you really work on being able to do it? Let's talk about all of those things in this video. The Asian squat is sometimes known as the primal squat, and it's basically when you are sitting down with your butt all the way down towards the ground. Your feet are still planted on the floor, your knees are really bent, your hips are really flexed, and you just comfortably hang out here. Sometimes people call this the rest squat. You'll find people all over Asia just hanging out in this position, regardless of how old they are or how young they are. They'll be eating, talking, playing games, or smoking cigarettes. For many Westerners, this Asian squat position seems horribly uncomfortable and completely impossible. So what does it mean if you have trouble Asian squatting, and what are you missing out on if you can't Asian squat?
People who accumulate time in a deep squat on a regular basis experience significantly lower levels of back pain and digestion issues. Deep squats are great for supporting spinal health as well as aiding physiological processes in our body, such as digestion and elimination. The science is stacking up, and we know that sitting for prolonged periods is devastating to our health and longevity. For countless ages throughout time, human beings have been able to crouch down in a resting squat for relaxation, working, cooking, communing, and even for taking a dump. It appears that many digestive problems, including colon cancer and hemorrhoids, can be attributed to a lack of time spent in a deep squat. For example, evidence in favour of the old-fashioned squatting toilet is mounting, and devices to help the unaccustomed with squatting are being invented at a fast rate. Do yourself a favour and Google Squatty Potty. Sitting on the toilet and not squatting down like we are designed to do pinches off the end of the colon, so your bowels are like a kinked hose and unable to fully release. In a traditional squatting position, your knees are pulled up closer to the chest. This aligns the body as Mother Nature intended, which aids dropping the kids off at the pool. Your rectum relaxes and straightens, which enables complete emptying of the bowels without the straining and grunting. Fecal matter that remains in your bowels can be a big problem. It causes accumulation of toxins and makes the passageway increasingly narrower. Your body was not designed for prolonged exposure to substances that should be evicted regularly. The risk of certain health problems is possibly increased by the lack of time spent in the bottom of the squat. Constipation, hemorrhoids, colitis, colon cancer, Crohn's disease, diverticulitis, prostate disorders, hernia, GERD, and sexual dysfunction. It is interesting to note that non-Westernized societies, where squatting is still practiced daily, have a much lower prevalence of these health problems.
In order to Asian squat, you need to have enough flexibility in your hamstrings and in your glutes and in all those tiny little hip muscles like your adductors and the deeper little rotators too. Your hip flexor muscles, your anterior tib, meaning these muscles that are on the front of your shin, also need to be strong enough to maintain this position. You have to have enough flexibility in your calf muscles so that they can lengthen enough to allow you to let the knee sit forward. And you need to have spinal muscles that can control your spine enough to help you balance and position yourself comfortably. That way you're not stuck in a hunch. Being able to do the Asian squat or primal squat comfortably for long periods of time doesn't make you a better person necessarily. It just means that you have better flexibility than the average Westerner who lives his or her life in a chair all day. So what does it mean if you can't Asian squat right now? First of all, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not Asian. There are many Asians who have grown up in Western countries who cannot do the Asian squat. Second, If you can't do the Asian squat, it doesn't mean that you are genetically blocked from being able to do the Asian squat. And I also want to let you in on a little secret, but you have to promise that it stays between you and me. The thing is, I'm Asian. You can see that. But there was a time in my life where I couldn't Asian squat, and it was kind of embarrassing. But the lesson that you can learn from my experience is that you too can Asian squat if you just put in the time to teach your body how to do it.
Hey, we're back. Episode 90, 3 months in, every 30 days, test, retest, which means what? We are going for the 10-minute squat today. Just as a reminder, the goals, not to destroy your knees. A lot of people are burning. It's because they lack the range of motion in the ankle. Those anterior tips are pulling against the passive excess or the passive drag of their heel cords. It's much like the quads having to work against the hamstrings when they're too tight. So if you're burning like mad in here, chances are you're missing some of this stuff. So let's start baseline. Can you hang out? There's a big discussion about where the heck your feet should be. Your feet should always be in the position where you can generate the most torque. I'm not a big fan of this foot out position, and the reason is it allows this knee to drop in, and I have a pretty valgus force on my knees. That's an ACL destroyer. I internally rotate, lock the pelvis off, no good. If you look at Boyle and a lot of these guys doing these single leg squatting exercises, we want to reinforce a straight forward foot so that when our athletes land, boom, they can control that shin, right? One of the reasons we don't just want to set up this as the only dominant position. Having said that, it's absolutely okay for your feet to turn in if that's the way you get to depth, which says something about your hips. It says something about how you're going to be able to express range of motion. But we're always trying to land, or at least have the foot in a position where we can generate the most force, the most torque at the hip, which is that extra rotation. You'll also notice that in this position, I tend to have a little bit stronger arch. In this position, it's really difficult for me to have that same supported arch position. In fact, I have to be much further out in this position than I do in this position to have a neutral supported foot. So is it okay for knees to go out past the ankle? Absolutely. This is why your ankle hinges this way. This rotational piece is one of the ways that we set up a strong, stable ankle. This is how we collapse, pronate, drop navicular, etc., etc. So hang out today. See if you can collect 10 minutes. If you're a superstar, get a bar on your back, press arms overhead, work on some of these other positions, see how your shoulder flexibility relates to your trunk flexibility. If you start to burn terribly, press back. Part of the thing we want to do is inoculate people against destroying their meniscus. So if you're here and you start to sag for a while, you've been hanging out, don't just jump out of it, press your knees to vertical, then pop back up, okay? But even if you're working on the ground for a while, doing a project, you wouldn't leave your knees out and forward, they'll crick and pop. Today, every 30 days, we're going to do this 10-minute squat. If you need to get out on one side and kind of make it worse, you can do that. You can catch your adductor here, this medial hamstring, still shoving the knee out in a good position. That actually makes it a little bit worse because I'm lower. I can do the same thing the other side. I can take my stance wider, play around with this position, closing the ankles off. The idea is that I get to let the back restore. I'm going to go ahead and round into flexion. It's okay to be flexed in this bottom position because the back isn't set on a hard surface causing a big flexion. I get this big global flexion, restores nutation, which is how that kind of pelvis rotates into itself. So how the sacrum locks and unlocks. That's that counter nutation idea. Instead of being locked in all the time to sacrum to pelvis, we get to restore that motion. And this is one of the ways. This is why we don't see much hip disease and much more lumbar disease in the third world.
Hey, welcome back to MWOD. Hey, a lot of times people talk about what is normal range of motion. What is normal? Define normal. Well, look, we know that there's variations in anatomy, the length of your femurs, different than my femurs. Diane's a woman. I'm less of a woman than Diane, let's be honest, right? But the question is not about the individual anthropometry and mechanics, it's about function. And so what normal is can you achieve these basic shapes that make us human, make us functional? So one of the things that we're talking about is, let's define full range of motion in the hip. Now we often say pistoling means that I can get into, I can get into full range of motion in the hip and the ankle, right? Diane's not collapsing. Now, That's well and good, but in that shape, because I'm unloaded, what we tend to see is when people are in that pistol position, they reverse. So one of the questions now, just in full caveat, I'm here with Diane Fu, and Kristen Newman is filming, right? Two of my besties. But one of the things that happens is that when you receive a heavy-ass clean or full snatch, and you're all the way in the bottom position, which is somewhere sometimes it takes, right? Should you be rounded in that shape?
Fuck no. Sorry.
No, you should not be. So let's define full range of motion. The full range of motion is when I'm sitting, whoop, ass to ankle, is my back flat, and can I maintain a flat back in the shape? Now you'll notice if Diane has no Olympic lifting shoes on, I have no Olympic lifting shoes on, Diane has a little bit more toe out, doesn't matter. She's in this range of good hip function, but the idea here is I should be able to hand something very heavy to her from this shape, and she should be able to stand up out of that position. So as you're working towards achieving, remember, of course, it's all the capsular dynamics that we've got to do to be good, but the difference in most people being able to achieve this is the ankle. What we see is that people, you know, when they don't have the ankle range of motion to let the femurs come forward, then they can't chase the pelvis back into neutral. Stuck, can't reverse. As soon as the femurs come forward, I can roll the pelvis under. And this is one of the reasons why we're looking so much at ankles in our athletes. And as soon as I ask my athletes to do this, they're like, I got this. You just need high enough Olympic lifting shoes. So when we establish normal, what is normal? Normal is, if you're a functioning human being and I hand you something heavy from a squat, you shouldn't have to be reversed under. So let that be the baseline.
And it's helpful if you want to take a poo in the woods or have dinner in Thailand. All right?
And in pure Dimas fashion, he's going for gold. His third attempt, it's do or die for Dimas. 207.5 kilograms on the bar, 457 pounds.
Struggled with the clean.
For those of us watching back in 2004, this was an extraordinarily tense and potentially historic moment as Pyrrhos Dimas, one of the greatest weightlifters of all time, went for gold on the final attempt in the final competition of his career. If you know anything about Dimas, odds are you already know what happened here. If not, let's save you the stress of all this suspense.
Too much weight. And the dream ends for Dimas.
Dimas's failure to win gold in 2004 was still his apotheosis to the pantheon of weightlifting gods. He'd already won 3 Olympic gold medals, and winning a bronze here in Athens makes him the most decorated weightlifter of all time. But Dimas's name still resonates in the sporting world, and his is a story that would make any resident of Mount Olympus proud. You don't win 4 Olympic medals without an extraordinary combination of talent, hard work, and luck. So how does one reach this level of greatness? How do you go from communist-era southern Albania to a figure who embodies the ancient Greek ideal of athleticism? And furthermore, what do you do afterward? Let's go back before the Games in Athens. Before the world records, before the first Olympic gold in Barcelona in 1992, and long before a small group of us flew out to rural Greece, really rural Greece, to meet and spend time with Dimas. Before all this, there was just a young kid in southern Albania with a goal that had absolutely nothing to do with weightlifting. Let's take a moment here to clarify some shorthand that Dimas is using. To oversimplify things a lot, there are basically 2 dominant approaches to training. The one Dimas is referring to here is often called Russian-style training and has been developed and refined over decades of research in the second half of the 20th century. Basically, this involves a wide range of exercises in addition to the classic lifts, so things like pulls, variations of the lifts, and supplementary work. Lots of repetitions in the 60 to 80% range with variety in the reps and weights, and varying levels of intensity during the training cycle through the manipulation of reps, weight, and volume. In short, periodization. This would involve a preparatory period, a pre-competitive period, and a competitive period, where the athlete would ultimately be in peak condition for competition day. In general, this type of training is called the Russian or Soviet approach, as it was pioneered and written about by Soviet scientists. Figures like Robert Roman and Alexei Medvedev, coaches of the national team in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, were researchers and approached weightlifting with a scientific eye. Their work was the foundation for hundreds, if not thousands, of world-class athletes. The Soviet approach was how Dimas and his fellow Albanians were brought up in the sport. This changed when Dimas moved from Albania to Greece in 1991.
So I started competing with Greece and very quickly became a part of the national team, which is where I met Christos Iakovou, the coach of the Greek national team. The program here in Greece was purely Bulgarian. That is warming up with doubles up to around 60%, and then doing single repetitions to 100% of your daily best.
Here, Dimas is referring to the other major approach to training, the so-called Bulgarian system. Few things in weightlifting inspire so much heated debate as the Bulgarian program, what it is, how it was used, and whether it actually works. This isn't the place to get into those arguments, but here are the basic details. Compared to the Russian or Soviet approach, the Bulgarian system involves much fewer exercises, typically only snatches, clean and jerks, and squats, done for singles up to a daily maximum. This type of training is most often associated with Ivan Abadjiev, who coached the Bulgarian national team to unprecedented success in the 1970s, 80s, and late 90s. In his words, when he first started as the country's national coach, they were using about 20 exercises. During his tenure, he cut that down to about 5. Instead of counting up the attempts at lower percentages, 70 and 80% for example, like the Russians, he only focused on the maximum attempts, which he felt were the only ones that were important for improving results. Debates over comparative effectiveness aside, it's hard to argue with the success of the Bulgarian team. Among the many superstars to come out of this system, none is more famous or celebrated than the great Naim Suleymanoglu, a Turkish lifter who was originally from Bulgaria. Suleymanoglu's 500-point Sinclair total, based on a formula used to compare lifters across weight classes, is still the highest of all time. Yet this sort of training is not for those without an iron constitution.
Training started right after breakfast. We would start with back squats, then do snatch, clean and jerk, then front squat. This was the morning session alone. We ate lunch around 1 p.m., rested till about 4, and then at 4 began the afternoon training session. We would snatch, clean and jerk, and squat, and then ate dinner around 7:30 to 8. From 8 to 9:30, we trained again, either snatches or clean and jerks, plus more back squats, so 2 more exercises at the end of the day.
Let's go over that one more time.
Back squats first. Snatch, clean and jerk, and front squats. Snatch, clean and jerk, front squats. After one day we have snatch and back squats. Second day we have clean and jerk and back squats. We change one day snatch, one day in the third session. 2 more exercises. We do 1 day snatch, 1 day clean and jerk, and back squats.
So 3 sessions a day?
Yes, 3 days. Every day, but Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we do 100%. 100%. Next day, we do 85% from the day before.
Regularly going to maximal weights is a significant stressor, and in our conversations, Dimas was keen to emphasize the seriousness of the training environment and the intensity of this training.
大哥买了个新的呢。买新的啊。回到西安里的厨师。每天就这么变了。我晚上要装东西了。活动了，就不要脸。臭不要脸，谁不要脸？有人就不。手上现在我这手机上台就是的，还在骂你？对呀。出生日期为2021年4月27号。昨天这俩一个像，你看现在干嘛？行李还有及时拿着，比京东说的100万你是可以拿了。你瞎的，你看起来没产生你想象。你们这个托运的项目不是刚才这个我知道。这手会麻掉的。那就看到中间那我觉得你主要是就走过4个医生。上路客户的太少了。我实在搞140的。好啊，100多啊。走啊，出去啊。走。上头了，哎呦！没了，160个发手头了。765开是吧？哎，知道，我，出去啊！速度慢了一半。往后移，就是这一下，往后移。没人啊？打不动。打不了。6的机会吧。10的机会。
There are few weightlifters who invoke such inspiration into the world of weightlifters as Kuo Seung-chun. And there are few weightlifters who make such an effort to perfect their craft as Kuo Seung-chun. Purposeful, deliberate practice is, visually at least, the separator between her abilities and the rest. Whenever we've filmed Kuo Seung-chun specifically, there is a proactive engagement that she shows with what she's doing. It's the opposite of what we see with other, often very successful countries such as Bulgaria or Iran, where they touch their toes one time, take huge jumps, miss a top set, and call it a day. Kuo focuses on every single repetition. This training session started in the same way that most of her sessions do, with a more track and field style of outdoor warm-up. Leg swings, dynamic stretches, lunges, jumps, ladder footwork drills, even short sprints, maintaining her overall physical qualities of athleticism, her quickness, speed, agility that peripherally help contribute to central pillars of strength and power. And Kuo's focus on training, on the small things that she's working on her not just practicing but on deliberate, targeted practice, has helped her become the most dominant female weightlifter alive, at least by one metric, Roby points. The points that allow us to see how presiding a weightlifter is within their weight class, across classes and across genders. Unlike the Sinclair coefficient, Roby points allow us to compare men and women. And other than Lasha Talakadze, Kuo has the most Roby points in the world. More than Deng Wei, more than Shi Ziyong, Liu Zhaojun, Li Wenwen, above the whole dominance of the Chinese team. Despite having taken a lot of time off after the Olympics, Kuo's backlog of work and perfect movement allowed her to still win a few days after this training session, despite her depreciated levels of strength. Lifting 90% of a competition best with 100 kilos in the snatch and 130 kilos in the clean and jerk, Kuo took another win. With 10 world records to her name, 5 world championship titles, 33 international gold medals that I could count, and the reigning Olympic champion, Kuo Seung-chun is worth emulating.